4 people were found dead in a Valley Station home Saturday, and now LMPD tells us they were a family, and the father is responsible for their murders. The coroner identified those killed as 49-year-old Mary Stanton, 17-year-old Andrianna Stanton, 11-year-old Brianna Stanton, and 60-year-old Gary Stanton.
In November 2022, a family traveled from Kentucky to Kenya to bury a beloved father and grandfather. They mourned together. They reunited with relatives. They posed for photographs that captured what appeared to be resilience in the face of loss. To everyone around them, they looked like a family moving forward. Just weeks later, 3 of those family members will be dead. A respected Kenyan nurse, her 17-year-old daughter weeks away from graduating high school, and her 11-year-old daughter still discovering who she wanted to become. The person investigators concluded was responsible was not a stranger, not an intruder, not someone lurking in the shadows. It was the husband, the father, a man relatives will later describe as loving, supportive, and deeply involved in family life. A man who only days earlier had publicly called his wife the love of my life. So what happened? How does a family appear stable one moment and become the center of an international tragedy the next? And what happens when the person who holds the answers dies with them? Today, we examine the lives of Mary Njoki Muchemi Stanton, Andrianna Stanton, and Brianna Stanton. We follow their journey from Kirinyaga County, Kenya, to Louisville, Kentucky. We explore the hidden warning signs, the devastating events of December 2022, and the legal and emotional aftermath that stretched across 2 continents. Because sometimes the most difficult cases to understand aren't the ones filled with visible chaos. They're the ones that seem perfectly ordinary until everything changes. This is Crime Dopers, where crime meets truth.
Twisted tales in every folder. Truth runs hot while the trail gets colder. Crime Dopers, we don't look away.
Before we begin, a brief disclaimer. This episode discusses homicide, suicide, mental health struggles, grief, and family loss. The purpose of this documentary is educational and awareness-based. Everything presented is drawn from official investigations, public records, media reporting, and statements made by family members and community representatives. Where facts are confirmed, we will say so. Where questions remain unanswered, we will acknowledge that as well. This episode is not intended to sensationalize tragedy or speculate beyond available evidence. Out of respect for the victims and their loved ones, graphic details have been minimized. Most importantly, remember that behind every headline are real people and real families. And in this story, 3 lives were lost long before their time. Let's begin. Before we talk about how the story ended, we need to understand how it began. Because the story of Mary Njoki Muchemi Stanton is ultimately a story about ambition, sacrifice, and responsibility. Like many immigrants who leave home in search of opportunity, Mary carried more than her own dreams. She carried the hopes of an entire extended family. Born and raised in Kenya, Mary's roots ran deep in Kirinyaga County. She grew up in a culture where family extended far beyond a single household. Success was rarely viewed as an individual achievement. When one person advanced, everyone advanced. Those values stayed with her throughout her life. Friends and relatives described Mary as hardworking, focused, and deeply committed to those around her. Over time, that sense of responsibility would stretch far beyond Kenya's borders. Eventually, Mary settled in Louisville, Kentucky, where she built a life, raised a family, and established a successful career in healthcare. By 2022, she was a registered nurse, a profession that demanded long hours, emotional resilience, and an unwavering commitment to helping others. But Mary wasn't content with simply working within the healthcare system. She wanted to build something of her own. Driven by an entrepreneurial spirit, she launched an adult daycare and home healthcare business. It was an ambitious undertaking that required managing clients, regulations, staffing, and finances while maintaining the quality of care people depended on. The business represented more than professional success. It represented independence, security, and the fulfillment of years of sacrifice. But Mary's achievements weren't limited to Kentucky. According to relatives, she remained deeply involved in supporting family members back in Kenya. She contributed to education expenses, family projects, and financial needs whenever she could. For many relatives in Kiamaina village, Mary wasn't simply a daughter or sister. She was a pillar, someone whose success created opportunities for others. At the center of Mary's world, however, were her daughters, 17-year-old Andrianna Stanton and 11-year-old Brianna Stanton. Andrianna was a senior at DuPort Manual High School, one of Louisville's most respected schools. Graduation was within reach. Like many teenagers her age, she was looking ahead to the next chapter of her life: college, career possibilities, and the freedom that comes with adulthood. Relatives describe her as bright, ambitious, and full of promise. She represented the next generation of a family that had worked tirelessly to create opportunities. Brianna, meanwhile, was a sixth grade student at No Middle School. At 11 years old, her world revolved around school, friends, family, and the simple adventures of childhood. Teachers and classmates will later remember her as a young girl whose absence left a profound void. Both sisters embodied something powerful: possibility. The future was still unfolding before them. Then there was Gary Stanton, Mary's husband and the father of their daughters, a 60-year-old mechanic who, to those outside the family, appeared to be part of a stable and successful household. The Stantons owned a home in Louisville's Valley Station neighborhood. The children were thriving in school. Mary's career was flourishing. The family maintained strong ties to Kenya while building a life in the United States. From the outside, it looked like a success story many immigrant families aspired to achieve. Photographs showed celebrations, vacations, family gatherings, and ordinary moments of happiness. Nothing publicly suggested the family was approaching a crisis, and this is one of the most unsettling aspects of this case. When tragedy strikes, people often look back searching for obvious warning signs, but according to relatives and friends, there were none that stood out. Instead, what they saw was a hard-working mother, two promising daughters, a supportive husband, and a future that seemed firmly in place. A family living their version of the American dream. But in late 2022, that dream will be interrupted by another loss, one that will bring the entire family back to Kenya, a journey that, in hindsight, will become the final happy chapter they shared together.
Can't believe that Derek will do such a thing. I mean, this is a person who used to share even his password and account details with my sister. So they used to operate together. Everything was open about their relationship.
We started with talking about building a life. Now, let us talk about loss. Just weeks before the tragedy that will devastate two continents, the Stanton family was dealing with another family heartbreak: the death of Mary's father, Njoki Muchemi. For many Kenyan families, the death of a parent represents more than the loss of a loved one. It marks the passing of a family historian, a guide, and a connection between generations. Njoki had witnessed Mary's journey from Kirinyaga County to Kentucky. He had watched her build a career, raise children, and create opportunities that extended far beyond her own household. His death was deeply personal. What made it even more difficult was that Njoki died while visiting the United States. For immigrant families, losing a loved one abroad creates challenges most people never have to consider. Alongside grief comes a maze of paperwork, transportation arrangements, government approvals, and significant financial costs. The Muchemi family made a decision that many diaspora families would understand immediately. Geoffrey would be taken home to Kenya, home to the community where he had lived his life, home to be buried among family and ancestors. The funeral was scheduled for November 12th, 2022. And so the Stanton family traveled to Kenya. Mary, Gary, and their daughters, Andrianna and Brianna. At the time, nobody could have known this would be one of the last major family gatherings they would ever share. For anyone unfamiliar with Kenyan funeral traditions, these gatherings are often far more than burial ceremonies. They are family reunions. Relatives travel long distances to be together. Stories are shared. Relationships are renewed. Children meet cousins they may only know through phone calls and photographs. Communities rally around grieving families. By all accounts, the Stanton family participated fully in those moments. They spent time with relatives, attended family gatherings, supported funeral arrangements, and appeared united in their grief. Nothing publicly suggested a family in crisis. In fact, one of the most striking aspects of this case is how relatives described Gary Stanton during the trip. After the murders, many people naturally wondered whether warning signs had existed. Had anyone noticed unusual behavior? Were there signs of marital problems? Did something happen during the Kenya visit? And according to family members, the answer was no. Mary's brother, Moses Muchemi, would later become one of the family's most visible voices. In interviews, he repeatedly described the shock relatives felt after learning what had happened. Because during the Kenyan trip, Gary appeared engaged, supportive, and committed to the family.
I saw her like 3 weeks ago. She and her husband, they came, and nothing seemed off, as in the husband greeted us well. He liked children a lot, so he would even take my kids out, as he's taking everyone else's, including my brother's kids.
According to relatives, he contributed significantly toward the costs associated with Geoffrey's burial, a considerable expense given the international transportation and funeral arrangements involved. For family members, this detail became difficult to reconcile later. The same man who helped honor his father-in-law's memory will soon be identified as the person responsible for destroying the family he appeared to support. That contradiction remains one of the most difficult aspects of the case to understand. Family members also described a relationship that appeared stable. There were no reports of public arguments, no visible signs of separation, no indication that the marriage was under extraordinary strain. Some relatives even recalled Gary openly discussing practical matters like finances and family responsibilities, behavior they interpreted as signs of trust and partnership. To those observing from the outside, the Stanton family looked like a family navigating grief together, not a family approaching catastrophe. Relatives also remembered Gary spending time with younger family members during the visit. He interacted with nieces and nephews, joined family activities, and participated in the everyday moments that often define large family gatherings. Those memories will later take on a different significance, not because they revealed hidden clues, but because they highlighted how ordinary everything seemed. And that's one of the cruel realities of hindsight. After a tragedy, people revisit photographs, conversations, and memories searching for answers. They examine moments that once felt ordinary and wonder whether they missed something important. But often, there's no dramatic clue waiting to be discovered. Sometimes, people genuinely appear okay. Sometimes, families genuinely appear stable. And that's what makes certain tragedies so difficult to process. Perhaps nowhere was this more evident than at Geoffrey's burial. Family members gathered to mourn a father and grandfather. Believing they were closing one painful chapter, no one imagined another funeral would soon follow. Not for one person, but for three, a daughter and two granddaughters. As the trip came to an end, life seemed ready to resume. The family returned to Kentucky. The girls returned to school. Mary returned to work. The routines of daily life slowly reappeared. But while relatives believed the family was moving forward, another story may have been unfolding beneath the surface, a story that will fast reveal itself online. And in hindsight, that digital trail will become one of the most discussed aspects of this entire case.
We don't know how to move on without her. She was my best friend. I talk to her every day. And nothing on the phone calls could have prepared me for this. There was nothing that could prepare us for this. There was no warning sign, nothing whatsoever. They seemed happy.
The family had returned home. The funeral was over, but within days, a Facebook post would suggest that something far more complicated was happening behind the scenes. One of the defining characteristics of modern investigations is that people often leave behind a digital record of their lives, photographs, messages, status updates, moments shared publicly that later take on new meaning. In the Stanton case, one Facebook post will become impossible to ignore, not because it explained what happened, but because it hinted at a struggle few people appear to have fully understood. The date was November 22nd, 2022, just days after returning from Kenya. To relatives, life seemed to be returning to normal. The funeral was over. Work had resumed. School had resumed. The family appeared to be moving forward. But that day, Gary Stanton posted a message about his mental health. According to archived reports, he wrote, and I quote, "I have struggled with mental health for many years. Therapists have not helped. The medications from psychiatrists have not helped. Mental health has a strong hold on me." End of quote. Even without the benefit of hindsight, those words are significant. They describe a long-term struggle, one serious enough to involve therapy, psychiatric care, medication, and a level of frustration that led him to share those feelings publicly. It's important to acknowledge something here. Mental illness does not automatically lead to violence. Most people living with depression, anxiety, trauma, and other mental health conditions never harm anyone. The significance of this post lies elsewhere. It suggests Gary may have been experiencing a personal crisis that remained largely invisible to those around him. The post conveys exhaustion, hopelessness, a sense that years of treatment had failed to provide relief. And for many observers, it raises difficult questions about what he may have been experiencing internally during those final weeks. At the time, however, there was little reason for friends or relatives to view the post as a warning of violence. People discuss mental health struggles online every day. Supportive comments are offered, concern is expressed, life moves on. Nothing in the message threatened anyone, nothing predicted what was about to happen. Yet, 10 days later, the post will be revisited repeatedly because of what followed. And then came another twist. Just 6 days after sharing that message, Gary made another public post. This one looked completely different. On November 28th, Mary's birthday, he shared a loving tribute to his wife. According to reports, he described her as the love of my life. To anyone reading it, the message painted a picture of affection, appreciation, and devotion, which creates one of the most puzzling contrasts in the entire case. November 22nd, a public admission of emotional struggle. November 28th, a public celebration of his marriage. December 2nd, the deaths of Mary, Andrianna, and Brianna. The timeline feels almost impossible to process. Human beings often want behavior to make sense. We want consistency. We expect suffering to look visible. We expect struggling people to appear troubled. But real life is rarely that straightforward. People can experience profound emotional distress while continuing to function normally. They go to work, attend family gatherings, celebrate birthdays, smile in photographs. Many become skilled at hiding what they are carrying internally. Psychologists often describe this as masking, the ability to maintain outward normalcy while struggling privately. Whether that was happening here is impossible to know with certainty. Only Gary knew exactly what he was experiencing. And with his death, many answers disappeared forever. What remains is a contradiction. A man publicly describing years of mental health struggles, the same man publicly celebrating his wife days later. Both posts appear genuine, yet neither explains what happened next.
But we still saw them on holidays and at Christmas, New Year's, Easter. From the outside looking in, it looked like a traditional happy family.
There's another factor worth considering: timing. The family had just returned from burying Mary's father. Grief affects people differently. For some, it strengthens connections. For others, it intensifies existing emotional struggles. That doesn't mean Geoffrey's death caused tragedy. There's no evidence supporting that conclusion, but it does place the events within a broader emotional context. A major family loss, an international trip, a return home, a public confession of psychological distress, and then catastrophe. The sequence is difficult to ignore. For Mary's family, discovering the significance of that Facebook post afterward was painful, not because it provided answers, but because it introduced new questions. Could anyone have understood the depth of his struggle? Could intervention have changed anything? Were there signs hidden within plain sight? Those are questions many families ask after unexpected tragedies. Unfortunately, they are questions that rarely receive definitive answers. What this case does highlight is a broader conversation about mental health, particularly within communities where emotional suffering is often kept private. People openly discuss physical illnesses, they discuss jobs, finances, family responsibilities, but emotional struggles are frequently hidden behind appearances of strength. And sometimes those struggles remain invisible until a crisis forces them into the open. The Facebook post ultimately revealed two realities existing side by side: the reality seen by friends and relatives, and the reality Gary hinted at online. Neither fully explains the tragedy, but together they reveal something deeply human: the fact that people are often far more complicated than the versions of themselves they present to the world. And while life continued around them, students attending school, co-workers returning to work, families preparing for the holidays, the Stanton family had entered its final days together. No one knew it at the time. No one knew that in a quiet Louisville neighborhood, a tragedy was about to unfold that will leave investigators, relatives, and an entire community. The Facebook post raised questions. The crime scene would reveal consequences. And on the morning of December 3rd, 2022, those questions would collide with a reality nobody was prepared to face.
It was a shock, and it's very painful for a mother. But there's nothing I can do.
December 3rd, 2022. A cold Saturday morning in Louisville, Kentucky. Across the city, families were settling into their weekend routines. Holiday decorations were beginning to appear. Schools were preparing for winter break. Christmas was only weeks away. But inside a home on East Pages Lane in the Valley Station neighborhood, an unimaginable tragedy had already unfolded. At approximately 8:45 a.m., Louisville Metro Police officers responded to the residence. What they found would immediately transform a family tragedy into a homicide investigation. Inside the home were 4 bodies: Mary Njoki Muchemi Stanton, 17-year-old Andrianna Stanton, 11-year-old Brianna Stanton, and 60-year-old Gary Stanton, the husband and father. All 4 were dead. For veteran investigators, death scenes are an unfortunate reality of the profession, but some scenes leave a lasting impact, even on experienced officers. According to statements from Louisville Metro Police officials, this was one of those cases. Major Mika Shu later acknowledged the emotional toll the incident took on responding personnel. This wasn't a dispute between strangers. It wasn't a random act of violence. It was an entire family, a mother, 2 daughters, and a father. A household erased within the walls of its own home. As investigators processed the scene, the evidence pointed toward a domestic murder-suicide. The suspected perpetrator was Gary Stanton. The victims were Mary, Andrianna, and Brianna. Gary himself had died from what investigators determined was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. From a law enforcement standpoint, establishing responsibility happened relatively quickly. Understanding motive proved far more difficult, because unlike many criminal cases, there will be no suspect interview, no interrogation, no trial, no opportunity to hear an explanation from the person investigators concluded was responsible, and that reality will leave a painful void throughout the entire case. The Jefferson County Coroner's Office later conducted autopsies to determine the circumstances of each death. Those findings provided a clearer picture of what had occurred inside the home. According to the reports, Mary sustained multiple gunshot wounds. Andrianna also sustained multiple gunshot wounds. Brianna sustained a single gunshot wound. Gary died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Those findings suggested the violence did not occur in a single instantaneous moment. Instead, investigators believed multiple encounters occurred within the residence. Without surviving witnesses, there are limits to what can be reconstructed. Public records cannot tell us every movement, every conversation, or every second that unfolded inside that house. But the forensic evidence indicates that the victims experienced different circumstances during the attack, and the reality only deepens the tragedy. It's important to remember that behind every forensic report are human lives. Mary was a nurse, entrepreneur, daughter, sister, and mother. Andrianna was a high school senior standing on the edge of adulthood. Brianna was still navigating childhood, discovering who she wanted to become. When homicide investigations become public, attention often shifts toward evidence, timelines, and investigative conclusions. But those details matter because of the lives they interrupted. 3 futures ended that night. 3 people who should have had years ahead of them. As investigators continued their work, another question emerged. Was there an explanation? A letter? A journal entry, a recording, a note that could provide context, something that might answer the question everyone was asking: why? But according to law enforcement and public reporting, no manifesto was found, no detailed explanation was left behind, no document emerged that could explain what happened or why. That absence became one of the most defining features of the case, because while police determined who was responsible, motive remained largely unknown, and uncertainty can become one of the hardest burdens families carry after a tragedy. People can confront painful truths, they can process difficult realities, but unanswered questions have a way of lingering. With Gary Stanton dead and no evidence pointing toward any additional suspects, Louisville Metro Police formally closed the criminal investigation. From a procedural standpoint, the case was resolved. From a human standpoint, it was anything but. Friends wanted answers, relatives wanted answers, classmates wanted answers, the Kenyan community wanted answers. How could a family that appeared stable unravel so completely? How could a husband publicly celebrate his wife days before allegedly taking her life? And how could a tragedy of this magnitude occur without warning signs? Those questions remain part of the story today. Because although investigators established what happened, the deeper question of why remains unanswered. And while police were preparing to close their files, Mary's family was about to face a completely different challenge. Not a criminal investigation, a legal one. One involving inheritance laws, business ownership, immigration hurdles, and a little-known legal principle that will determine the future of everything Mary had spent decades building.
I wish Gary could have talked to me. If there was any issue, I just wish he could have reached out to any one of us, even to me personally. I thought we were close, but now I realize we were not so close. He could have just reached out to me the way he reached out to me when he tried reaching out to her when she was here. She was like a second mom to me. Hata kunisomea, if kama kuna mtu angeza kunisomea na nimsikie, it was my sister. Mtu mwingine angenisomea, not even my parents, because she was the one who was like funding me. And
for many families, the end of a criminal investigation marks the beginning of another struggle, not one fought with detectives and evidence, but with paperwork, court filings, and legal systems. That was the reality facing the Muchemi family, because while Louisville Metro Police had concluded the investigation, an entirely different question remained. What would happen to everything Mary had built? Her business, her home, her financial assets, her legacy. The answer will depend largely on a legal principle known as the Slayer Statute. Most people have never heard of it, yet it exists in many states for a simple reason. The law does not allow someone to benefit financially from intentionally causing another person's death. Kentucky's version, found in KRS 381.280, treats a killer as though they died before their victim. In practical terms, it removes them from the line of inheritance. The principle is straightforward. No one should profit from a crime. In the Stanton case, this became critically important. Had Gary survived, questions would have arisen regarding inheritance rights, insurance proceeds, and ownership interests connected to Mary's estate. Instead, Kentucky law required the courts to treat him as though he had predeceased her. That prevented assets from passing through him as a result of the killings. But applying that principle wasn't as simple as it sounds. This case involved multiple deaths, overlapping estates, business interests, and surviving relatives living thousands of miles away in Kenya. Every account had to be reviewed, every asset identified, every legal relationship examined, and among the most significant issues was Mary's healthcare business. Like many small businesses, it depended heavily on its owner. Mary wasn't simply an investor. She was the founder, the operator, the person who held the entire enterprise together. When she died, the business effectively froze. Decisions had to be made regarding operations, assets, liabilities, and eventual liquidation. For the family, this wasn't merely a financial matter. It was the preservation of something Mary had spent years building. Relatives later explained that much of their focus centered on ensuring Mary's remaining assets could ultimately benefit her surviving family members, particularly her elderly mother in Kenya. By this point, Geoffrey was gone, Mary was gone, Andrianna was gone, and Brianna was gone. The family was navigating multiple layers of grief while simultaneously dealing with a foreign legal system, and that created another obstacle: distance. The relatives most capable of representing Mary's interests lived in Kenya, not Kentucky, which meant they needed legal access to the United States in order to administer the estate properly. According to family accounts, emergency immigration accommodations helped facilitate travel for key relatives, including Mary's brother, Moses Muchemi. Without that assistance, the probate process would have been significantly more difficult. Imagine the situation. You lose your sister, 2 nieces, you're grieving, and at the same time, you must navigate attorneys, courts, business records, property transfers, and legal deadlines in another country. It's an enormous burden only few people are prepared for. Yet, Mary's family persisted because they believed her legacy deserved protection. Among the most significant assets was the family home on East Pages Lane, the same house where the tragedy occurred. Homes occupy a unique place in grief. They are more than real estate. They contain memories, family dinners, birthday celebrations, ordinary moments that become priceless after loss. Eventually, as part of the estate administration process, the property was sold. On December 21st, 2023, more than a year after the murders, the home sold for approximately $245,000. The sale marked the end of a chapter, not just legally, emotionally. The house where a family once built a life had become part of the past. What stands out most about this chapter was not the legal complexity. It's the determination of the family. Relatives consistently emphasized one goal: protecting Mary's legacy, not focusing on the crime, not elevating the perpetrator, protecting the memory of a woman who spent her life building opportunities for others. A nurse, a business owner, a provider, a daughter, a mother. By the end of 2023, many of the major legal hurdles had finally been resolved, but another challenge remained. One no statute could address, one no court could resolve. How does an entire community grieve a loss this profound? Because while lawyers were handling paperwork, communities in Kentucky and Kenya were preparing to do something equally important. They were preparing to remember.
She's not just a lady who was shot in the house with her kid. She was a nurse. She was an entrepreneur. She loved her family so well.
When tragedy strikes, attention often focuses on the crime itself, the investigation, the evidence, the unanswered questions. But eventually, every community reaches a point where it must decide what comes next. How do you honor the victims? How do you support the people left behind? How do you ensure that a family story becomes larger than the circumstances of their deaths? Those were the questions facing relatives, friends, classmates, church members, and members of the Kenyan diaspora in the days following the Stanton family tragedy. And almost immediately, people began responding. The timing could not have been more difficult. Only weeks earlier, the family had already spent significant resources repatriating and burying Geoffrey Migwi Muchemi in Kenya. International funerals are expensive. Flights, documentation, transportation, burial arrangements, travel costs. The financial burden had already been substantial. Now, the family was faced with planning 3 more funerals, a mother and her 2 daughters. The scale of the loss was overwhelming, but so was the response. Across Kentucky and Kenya, fundraising efforts emerged almost immediately. Community members organized GoFundMe campaigns, Cash App information circulated online, M-Pesa channels were established for supporters in Kenya, church groups mobilized, friends shared donation links, families contributed what they could, some gave money, others gave time, many simply offered support and prayers. What emerged was a powerful example of diaspora solidarity. People who had never met Mary personally still felt connected to her story because they recognized it. A Kenyan professional building a life abroad, supporting relatives back home, balancing two cultures, creating opportunities for the next generation. For many immigrants, that story felt familiar, and when tragedy struck, people responded as though it had happened to one of their own. As funeral planning continued, another difficult decision emerged. Where should Mary, Andrianna, and Brianna be laid to rest? At first, repatriation seemed like a natural choice. Mary's father had just been buried in Kenya. Many close relatives lived there. The family's roots remained there. Returning them to Kenya would place them near generations of loved ones and allow relatives easier access to their graves. But another perspective soon emerged, one that carried tremendous emotional weight. The perspective of the community the girls had grown up in. By this point, students and teachers at DuPont Manual High School and No Middle School were grieving as well. Andrianna and Brianna were not simply names in news reports. They were classmates, friends, students whose absence will be felt every day. Teachers remembered them. Friends remembered them. Classrooms remembered them. For many young people, grief is closely connected to place. The ability to visit, to leave flowers, to sit quietly and remember, to say goodbye in their own time. According to family accounts and community reports, students and educators made heartfelt appeals asking that the family consider keeping Mary and her daughters in Louisville. Not because they wished to separate them from Kenya, but because Louisville was also home. It was where the girls had grown up, where they had attended school, where they had built friendships and created memories. The request reflected a reality familiar to many children of immigrants. They belonged to more than one place, more than one culture, more than one community. Andrianna and Brianna were Kenyan by heritage, American by upbringing. Their lives connected two worlds, and now both worlds were grieving them. For the family, it was an incredibly difficult decision. There was no wrong answer. Returning them to Kenya would honor ancestral roots. Keeping them in Louisville would allow friends and classmates a place to remember them. Both choices came from love. Both reflected genuine care. Ultimately, the family chose Louisville, a decision shaped by compassion for the community that had loved Mary, Andrianna, and Brianna alongside them. Preparations moved forward. A memorial service was held at St. Stephen Baptist Church. Friends, family members, church leaders, classmates, teachers, and community supporters gathered to mourn together. Stories were shared, memories were honored, and 3 lives were celebrated. Then came December 28th, 2022, the day of the burial. Mary, Andrianna, and Brianna were laid to rest at Green Meadows Cemetery, Louisville. For many attending, the service represented both an ending and a promise. An ending because it marked the final goodbye. A promise because it affirmed that these 3 lives would not be forgotten. And then there was one detail that many relatives found particularly emotional. The date, December 28th, exactly 1 month after Mary's birthday on November 28th. A birthday that had been publicly celebrated by her husband only days before the tragedy. 1 month later, loved ones stood beside her grave. The contrast was heartbreaking, yet for some family members, the timing also carried symbolic meaning. A reminder that Mary's life deserved to be remembered for far more than the way it ended. Because ultimately, this story is not only about violence, it's about legacy. Mary's legacy as a nurse, as an entrepreneur, as a daughter who never forgot where she came from, as a woman who supported family members across an ocean. Andrianna's legacy as a bright young woman preparing for graduation and adulthood. Brianna's legacy as a child whose kindness and spirit left a lasting impression on those who knew her. Those are the lives people continue to remember, not a crime scene, not a headline, not a court filing, the people behind them.
I didn't tell her goodbye. I didn't tell her that I love her. I didn't tell the girls that I love them too.
Years later, many questions remain unanswered. No note was left behind. No complete explanation emerged. The question of why continues to linger, but perhaps the most important lesson from this case lies elsewhere. In the conversations it sparked about mental health, about emotional transparency, about the pressure people sometimes carry in silence, particularly within communities where strength is often expected and vulnerability is rarely discussed. This case reminds us that outward appearances don't always tell the full story. A family can seem stable, a person can appear successful, a struggle can remain hidden, and because of that, honest conversations matter. Checking on people matters. Creating spaces where people can ask for help matters. Today, the names Mary Njoki Muchemi Stanton, Andrianna Stanton, Brianna Stanton continue to be remembered in both Kentucky and Kenya by friends, by relatives, by classmates, by church communities, and by countless people who encountered their story and were moved by it. Not because of how their lives ended, but because of how they lived. A mother who built opportunities for others, a daughter standing on the threshold of adulthood, a child with her entire future ahead of her, lives filled with promise, lives filled with purpose, lives that mattered. Before we close today's episode, it's time for the Crime Dopers life rule. Today's life rule is this: never mistake silence for strength. Some people carry enormous burdens behind successful careers, family photographs, and everyday smiles. Checking on the people you love shouldn't only happen when they are visibly struggling. It should happen when they seem fine too. Not because every struggle leads to tragedy, most do not, but because meaningful conversations create opportunities for support before a crisis ever develops. Ask the extra question, make the extra call, create room for honesty. You may never fully know what someone is carrying, but you can make sure they don't have to carry it alone. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Crime Dopers. My name is Wanja. If this story resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who values thoughtful conversations about family, community, and mental health. And as always, stay safe, stay aware, stay compassionate, because the truth matters, but people matter more. This is Crime Dopers, where crime meets truth.
Crime Dopers. We don't look away.